I will always remember the first time I heard Meatloaf. I remember every little thing as if it happened only yesterday. I was barely 17, and I once killed a boy with a Fender guitar. Okay, not really. I was 13 and living in Oxford, Mississippi. One day I went over to my friend Chris's house, and he wanted to turn me on to Meatloaf. Sharing my interest in all things Broadway and show tunes related, as well as heavy metal, it had been Chris who had introduced me to Queen as well, so I was keenly interested when he told me about Bat Out of Hell and Bat Out of Hell 2 Back into Hell. The first track he put on was Life is a Lemon and I Want My Money Back off of Bat 2, and the minute Kenny Aronoff's drums started their Thunder March, I was transported. Instantly lost in the exaggerated fantasy stylings of Michael Whalen's album art, I was swept away into a world that seamlessly fused the symphonic bombast of Andrew Lloyd Webber with the wailing guitars and biker jacket imagery of heavy metal. Further listens opened up a world of musical virtuosity, from the gothic majesty of I Would Do Anything for Love to the driving mid-tempo adult contemporary rock groove of Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through to the piercing tearjerker piano ballad Objects in the Rearview Mirror May Appear Closer Than They Are. I saw in Meatloaf, and just as importantly in his songwriter Jim Steinman, someone who saw the sprawling potential for heavy metal and hard rock as a serious, intricate art form. It was an influence that would loom large throughout the metal pantheon, with modern groups like Trans-Siberian Orchestra borrowing heavily from Bat Out of Hell's operatic grandeur. Throughout high school, I was just as transfixed by Meatloaf as I was by Dream Theater and Rush. His albums hit the perfect balance between memorable songwriting and prog rock abandon. Sure, the tunes were mostly 8 to 10 minutes long, but you never noticed it. You're too caught up in the tales of leather-clad James Dean-inspired anti-heroes meeting James Dean-inspired deaths, and teenage Romeo and Juliets torn apart by maniacal parents to notice that you've spent a cool half hour getting through the first 3 songs on the album. But where Meatloaf really kills it in a way few rockers can is on the ballads. Between his voice and Steinman's writing, we find ourselves keenly aware of romantic moments that few songwriters, especially in the machismo blustering world of heavy metal, ever explore. The anthemic joy of Hot Summer Night, with its playful werewolf motif, captures the exalted rush of the teenage makeout session, while 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad captures the subtly conflicting feelings at the end of a relationship, of still loving someone and wanting to run back to them while knowing it's truly over. It's heavy stuff, and Meatloaf and Steinman's collaborative magic somehow looks at it through a Rocky Horror Picture Show lens and makes it all the more emotional as a result. Much like Tom Waits, Meatloaf presents himself as an eccentric, over-the-top, utterly surreal character, and it's that bizarre character that catches you off guard, allowing him to jerk the tears out of you before you even realize it's happening. Meatloaf's career has had extreme highs and extreme lows, both artistic and financial. While his collaborations with Jim Steinman have been the highest of the highs in both cases, his non-Steinman catalog contains many overlooked gems like Execution Day, Bad Attitude, Razor's Edge, Running for the Red Light, and Midnight at the Lost and Found, all tracks that capture smaller, more localized facets of Meatloaf's virtuosic range. Despite ongoing high quality, I haven't given much attention to the more recent Meatloaf albums. The last Meatloaf album I listened to in depth was the excellent Bat Out of Hell 3, The Monsters Loose. Despite closing out the trilogy without Steinman, producer Desmond Child did an outstanding job of capturing the concept of a Bat Out of Hell experience, giving us all the Broadway theatrics and heavy metal majesty of the Bat Out of Hell concept, and showering us in the extraordinary guitar work of John Five, Steve Vai, Brian May, and many others. The real Bat Out of Hell 3, or at least the closest thing to it, was retitled as 1995's Welcome to the Neighborhood, which ended up only featuring a handful of Steinman compositions, my personal Steinman favorite, Original Sin, outstanding among them, with the rest of the album filled out by other writers. After Bat Out of Hell 3, Meatloaf, at least his most recent album, slipped off my radar again, and so it was a pleasant surprise to look at the cover of his latest offering, Braver Than We Are, and see the words, All Songs by Jim Steinman, emblazoned beneath the logo. I was psyched. This was what I'd been waiting for since Bat 2, but as I listened, track after track fell short of the mark. Album opener Who Needs the Young begins with a plodding blues riff that suddenly grinds to a halt, only to be replaced with Tin Pan Alley carnival music that's borderline funeral dirge. I get what they're trying to convey here. At 70 years of age, Meatloaf and Steinman are feeling their years, and this is a song about exactly that. When you're old, everything hurts and you feel tired all the time. You feel irrelevant and useless and have contempt for all the young people with their young bodies. Conveying that feeling with hopelessly out-of-date song stylings from the 19th century certainly gets the point across, but whose idea was it to start off a rock album this way? Why make the album's thesis statement, "We're too old to keep rocking, so we aren't even going to try"? Adding insult to injury, the song never really goes anywhere. There's not a memorable hook to be found. Someone like Freddie Mercury or Tom Waits could have handled this period piece better, finding in it the kind of pompous irony necessary to make it appealing to anyone not old enough to be dues current in the AARP. Second track, Going All the Way Is Just a Start, a 6-part, 11-minute epic, is arguably the most impactful moment on the album and the closest thing we ever get to recapturing the prog-infused days of Meatloaf yore. Despite an epic song structure, we are treated to strong, soaring, majestic hooks and memorable choruses, but right away it becomes apparent that they aren't so effective for anything Meatloaf is bringing to the table vocally. Indeed, when the harmonies kick in, it's Ellen Foley and Carla DeVito who carry the soaring hard rock intensity, while Meatloaf is content to almost whisper sing underneath. It's not a strikeout or a home run, but rather 4 balls and a slow walk to the first base. Third track, Speaking in Tongues, does feature some gorgeous gospel choir accompaniment, but the song itself goes in one ear and out the other. Loving You's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it does have a bit of that AOR radio meets epic goth quality that makes so many classic Meatloaf songs appealing, and the chorus is fairly engaging, but from the cheesy intro to the weirdly thin drums, there's a karaoke night feeling about the whole affair. Repeated listens made the song resonate a little more with me, but it still fell short of the mark. Souvenirs is another example of great instrumentation that goes nowhere. Instead of a gospel choir, we get a saxophone ensemble, and the soloing work, courtesy of David Luther, brings soulful redemption to a track that would otherwise feel aimless and phoned in. Just like the preceding track, Meatloaf is making grand declarations to some angelic representation of angelic womanhood, but it just feels directionless. It was on this track that I accepted that I just didn't like this album, but the next track, Only When I Feel, is pure garbage. I'm sorry, but it's not delivered with any spark, it's not a memorable melody, and it's yet another ballad in a long, uninterrupted series of limping, uninspired, pseudo-emotional throwaway throwbacks. I love Meatloaf, and it pains me to say this, but the first 60% of this album, barring a few high points and Going All the Way, is a downward spiral of disappointment. Amazingly, however, track 7 comes on and it kills. And I mean that in the best possible way. The song, More, opens with huge, heavy guitars, cinematic grandeur, captivating tribal drumming, and a sinister, brooding, and completely captivating melody. It's up-tempo and engaging, a real, bona fide rocker. Meatloaf's aging vocal delivery is still an issue, but this time his melody is complemented by the female accompaniment rather than overshadowed, and the blend works, reminding the listener of First We Take Manhattan by Leonard Cohen. The listener is left to wonder why this outstanding track wasn't the opening cut on the album. Why record a killer cut like this and bury it in the back? Perhaps it's because Steinman originally wrote this one almost 30 years ago for Sisters of Mercy, but it's without question the strongest song on the record. This bizarre, lopsided track listing continues with Gods, another hard rocker whose Eastern-sounding guitar riff recalls Queen classics like Death on Two Legs or the Prophet's Song. Ninth track, Skull of Your Country, takes us back to ballad country, but something truly strange happens. The chorus kicks in, and it's a passage from Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart. Yeah, Steinman wrote that one too, but it just feels out of place, especially now that it's been reworked to have some sort of vague political message. The final track, Train of Love, is another up-tempo rocker, and even though the drums and keys have that flat karaoke backing track feel, the song still captures that pseudo-50s rock and roll feel that Meatloaf and Steinman exploit so well. That's the biggest head-scratcher of this whole thing. Why were the 3 rocking tunes buried in the back and the ballads pushed up front? Those familiar with Music from the Elder, the largely forgotten Kiss concept album, will recall that album initially flopped in part part because the record label decided to rearrange the track order on the initial pressing. That's what it feels like on Braver Than We Are, but the overall weak material wouldn't be saved simply by reordering the heavier songs to feature more prominently. Buzz around this album has been that it's Meatloaf and Steinman's farewell, at least in terms of working together, and it's a damn shame for this to be their last at-bat, a pun horribly and without apology intended. A series of lackluster ballads punctuated by 3.5 semi-decent cuts do not a fitting send-off make. Bottom line, anyone from my generation and older has seen the old television commercials for the Munster Ballads CD collection that ended with the tagline, "Every bad boy has his soft side." The tagline for Braver Than We Are should have been, "Every soft boy has his bad side." Thumbs down. If you enjoyed this commentary, please help me continue to bring you more content by making a donation to patreon.com/JordanOwen42. Your contribution will help me turn this channel into a hub of libertarian pop culture discussion and current events commentary. Thank you for listening, and as always, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.